Welcome to the Theology of Love. I'm your host, Taddy Noy. Today I want to start with a question that sounds simple, but I really don't think it is. What is the deepest understanding of love? And maybe even deeper than that, what do we really mean when we say God is love? This phrase has been tossed around for a long time. A lot of people have heard it and believe it, but I think a lot of us have heard it in a way that is far too shallow and small. Usually when we hear the word love, we think of affection, romance or warmth, and kindness. Some also see it as compassion for others and self. All this matters. So as you hear my ideas of the theology of love, I do not want you to think I am dismissing any of this at all. I am merely trying to get at the deepest meaning of what I understand love really to be. My ideas are grounded in Christianity, Eastern thought, metaphysics, and more powerfully, my own lived experience. So I want to begin slowly and carefully, because some of the language I'm going to use here may sound unfamiliar to some, or you may have preconceived ideas about them already, especially if you come from more traditional Christian spaces. For some, this may sound a bit too metaphysical or a bit esoteric at first, and I really get that. I really do. But please stay with me, and I hope you can hear the heart of what I'm really trying to say, even if I do not use the language you are used to hearing. I want to be clear that I am not trying to move away from Jesus or ask anyone to abandon their own ideas of God here. Technically, I got here because of Jesus, and the worldview I'm about to discuss has given me an expanded view of God. Actually, Jesus is central to my understanding of this theology of love. He inspired and informed much of it, and I am also not trying to make some outside philosophy and lay it on top of him. What I'm going to attempt to say is that when I listen to Jesus deeply and really pay attention to what he keeps centering on, I recognize something consistent in his ministry, as well as the life and teachings of so many of our masters. And what opened in my heart was a deeply powerful lens that I couldn't deny or see past. Jesus' theology, in essence, was what I am calling the theology of love. Jesus says in Mark 12:29 through 31, that the greatest commandment is to love God with all that you are and to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I don't hear love as one virtue among many in this. I hear it as the center of the whole thing. When he says in Luke 17:20 through 21 that the kingdom of God is within you or among you or in your midst, or however you want to translate that, I hear him pointing people away from dogmatic structures of traditional ways of understanding religion and towards something nearer, deeper, and more immediate in our experience. Even moreover, when he tells people your faith has healed you in Luke 8:43 through 48, and in other stories like this, I hear him pointing to something that can be experienced now and initiated by us, not something that is happening to us by some exclusively outside of our control. And when he says, you will do greater things than these in John 14:12, I don't hear a man trying to make people dependent on him. I know that sounds contrary to popular interpretation, but stay with me here. I hear him attempting to wake people up to what human life can become when it is deeply aligned with the deepest truth of reality, what I am calling the theology of love. So before I go further, I want to say this plainly. Language starts breaking down pretty quickly when we talk about things this deep and abstract. Words are limited. They can only really point, but can't fully contain all the meaning. So I'm using language that gets as close as I can to what I mean. So I'm asking you to not get hung up on every term right away, especially if my words sound unfamiliar or if you may have other associations with them. I'm asking you to listen for the meaning and the reality underneath my words. All I am really doing is trying to express my ideas with words and metaphors that, that get at the closest proximity to the meaning of what I understand this framework to really be. Having said that, when I say God is love, I hope you can clearly see that I'm not talking about sentimentality. And I'm not talking about love as just a feeling. I'm talking about love as I'm talking about love as the deepest reality there is. Love as the ground of all being. It is the ultimate reality beneath existence. And for me, it is the deepest truth of who we are. It's also the truest way I've come to understand God and the message of Jesus. What I mean here is this. We enter this life through a physical veil, our bodies. We are also in a heavy physical world of experience. And because of this, we experience limitations, polarity, and deep contrast. Because of this, often so many of us move through life in survival mode, in distraction, and out of touch with the heart of love within us. And that is what gives rise to so much of our fear, so much of our pain, and the suffering that we carry here. The spiritual path, as I see it, is not about becoming worthy enough for God. And for me, it's not about constantly defining our life's enemies or adversaries or even fighting against them. Although many people spend their entire lives doing this very thing, which can make people feel very purposeful, but I do not believe this life is some kind of punishment or place where we make ourselves worthy by defeating these forces. For me, and the way I read Jesus, it's more about constantly aligning with the heart of God and embodying this in this life. It's about alignment with what we call love. When we allow ourselves to align with love, something profound opens within us. We begin to awaken to the truth of who we are each deeply. We begin to remember and start to see that who we think we are and this life's pain and struggle is really just an illusion. This is really the center of what I mean when I talk about the theology of love. Now, I didn't get here all at once. I have been reaching for this my whole life. When I was young, I found myself deeply drawn to people like Jesus, Buddha, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, and Moses. I didn't fully understand why at the time, but something in me recognized something in them. There was a depth there, a consciousness, a way of being that separated them from everyone else, something that felt more real than the ordinary ways most people seemed to move through this life. And I wanted to know that. I still do. So in my journey, it started with religion, not just religion in the shallow sense. To me, that feels superficial and performative. And I am not seeking approval either for some attempt to make myself worthy of divine status or a God in the heavens. I wanted to understand something that was more real to me. I wanted to understand what it was that made someone live a kind of life that seemed to be almost immune to so much of this world's pain and suffering. I wanted deep clarity of purpose and meaning that would transcend this life. I just knew it would give me a kind of peace and a kind of personal power that I felt entitled to and deserving of. So I searched for it. I searched for enlightenment in Scripture because I thought the answers were there. Then I went into college and seminary and studied Scripture, world religions, psychology, philosophy, and ethics because I thought maybe it was there too. By the time I got to seminary, I was primarily interested in the historical Jesus, theology, and ethics because I thought maybe it was there. I kept looking deeper and deeper because something in me knew there was more. And what I found was not exactly what I expected. What I found was that it was everywhere. It was in Scripture, it was in philosophy, it was in religion, it was in my own experience. It was in the beauty I saw all around me. It was in the suffering of this world. It was in loss and even tragedy. I could see its shadow. The divine was in everything if I looked hard enough. But even that wasn't the deepest realization. The deeper realization for me was that I could recognize it in all those places because somehow it was already within me too. I had to search for it outside myself in order to recognize it within myself. I had to go through the outer search to begin to discovering the inner reality. And now I understand much more deeply what so many of the great teachers meant when they said that what we most need to know is already within us. Love, or God, was always there, loving me, holding me, and encouraging me through my journey in this life. I started to see that I needed the path I was always on. I needed the searching, I needed the study, I needed the theology, I needed the philosophy, I needed the journey I was living, and eventually I needed the pain and losses of my life too. Let me explain. There is a difference between knowing the pieces of a philosophy and having life test that philosophy. There's a difference between saying love is real and having to ask whether love is still real when everything you thought mattered starts falling away. This is what my experience has shown me deeply. There was a time in my life when I had many of the things many people think matter most. I had material success, I had acquired some minor degree of wealth and affluence, I had a beautiful wife and daughter who loved me, I had a vibrant and strong body, and I even had an admiration from many in my career and life because of it. I had a lot of personal momentum in my life in all of these areas. And I'm not saying that any of those things were really bad or that they didn't serve me. On the contrary, I'm saying the reverse. I'm not saying that having these things was evil either, but I am saying they can become our identities. They can become the scaffolding we build our lives and personalities around. They can become the things we define ourselves by. They can become the gods we worship. I think it is because I've always asked for such deep meaning in my life. And because life does what it does, my life began to radically change. Not quickly, but slowly, and eventually abruptly at several spots. Life started to strip away all the things I had focused my identity on, the things I thought were me. This caused me deep personal suffering and pain in obvious and not so obvious ways. Lost my marriage. I lost much of the life I had enjoyed with my daughter. I lost much of the career I'd built. I lost the vibrant health I had always experienced and appreciated all of my life in the form of kidney failure. I also lost the body I had worked so hard to build for over 4 decades of my life. I lost financial stability that I had once known and appreciated. And at different points in that journey, I found myself staring into the kind of pain and suffering that does not stay theoretical anymore. And at moments in my journey, these tragedies drove me to dark places emotionally and intellectually. At one point, I even tried to kill myself after my divorce. It didn't work, and I do not say that dramatically. I say it because it's part of the truth of my life. It's part of what makes this all more than an idea for me. It's one thing to talk about love when life is working. It's completely another thing to ask what love is when you are sitting inside real grief, real pain, devastating embarrassment, or confusion. My identity was collapsing in real time, and I couldn't do anything about it. And for me, that's where my theology started to become very real in a profound way. Because I had to ask myself, what do I do with my suffering? If God is really good and loving, and how do I explain all of this life's pain I was experiencing? And if God was really love and the ultimate reality of this life, then how am I supposed to understand what was happening to me? Then why was God and my life breaking me? Those questions stopped being philosophical and started becoming urgent and real. Because if I couldn't find a satisfactory answer, I didn't want to be in this life anymore. And I think this is where some people get stuck. Because if God is love and not just a comforting idea, then why was I not thriving? I was suffering with real deep pain in this life. So I needed more clarity and a pathway to understanding myself and this life's pain. I have always had a sense of knowing that my body and this life experience are not evil. This world is not evil in some simplistic sense. The contrast here is not evil. And even deeper, the pain of life was not proof that reality or God was against me. My body is just the vehicle through which I experience limitation, pain, and suffering. It is the mechanism through which I experience contrast. And because of this, I could see that it was holding up a veil in front of me. It was hiding my worth and my ability to be in this life who I knew I wanted to be and who I intrinsically was deep inside. And I believe it's one of the main ways we all experience the forgetting and hopefully the remembering of who we are deeply. This may sound strange to some people, but from my vantage point right now, we are supposed to move through this physical life this way. And through the veil of separation from love and we experience fear, pain, and suffering, not because we're flawed or evil inherently, and not because God is testing us in some way to measure our resolve or faithfulness, but because this is the nature of this embodied life, and we came here to have the thrill and joy of connecting to love through all the hardships and contrast. This is the joy of remembering. This seems to me to be the deep truth of who we are, that we can love unconditionally in spite of the contrast of life. Because if we can do this, we make love the highest ethic and ideal for our lives. But in order to do this, we must transmute the energy of pain and suffering into gratitude and appreciation. Now, please understand that I am not saying that pain and suffering is good by itself, or that we need to romanticize grief in some way, or even that we need to see all of this life suffering as pleasant. I'm saying the challenge of this life is not separate from our purpose and awakening. It is part of what makes true enlightenment possible. And it's exactly what I see Jesus reflecting and exemplifying in his life and ministry. As a matter of fact, I had to transmute my own suffering this way. I think it is hard to really know what love is if you don't know what love is not. For example, how do you really know what flavor of ice cream you actually prefer until you try many flavors first? What you like becomes clearer by knowing what you don't like. In this same way, we can come to recognize peace in our heart by knowing fear and strife. And I think we can come to recognize the truth of our being by living through this life's illusion, which to me feels very contrary to my true, authentic nature, which is love. And if we allow ourselves to come to this life's deepest understanding about ourselves and others, when what we have built around our own identities gets stripped away and we feel this life's pain and suffering because of it, I do not say this casually. I really don't, because in my own life, it was rarely my wins or when it went so well that taught me the deepest lessons about myself. It was always my losses and those moments when I resisted looking into my fears or suffering. It was the moments I did not want to face, the moments I felt embarrassed by, the moments I felt undone by my life that had the most to show and teach me. Those were always the places that contained the most growth. As a matter of fact, when I experienced kidney failure, it was the deepest and most profound awakening I've ever had. I was in the hospital for 21 days. I was very sick, facing my mortality. And that seems to surprise most people. And what seems to surprise most people is how grateful I am now for this experience. I'm not grateful because I survived. I would have preferred to just die at the time. I'm grateful because that experience showed me something truly profound. Everything that I thought defined me was being stripped away. Things I thought were essential to me. Things I had built my identity around. This process did not just teach me a powerful lesson about my life, it crystallized everything I had been accumulating my whole life. Pieces of my philosophy that had been floating around separately for years suddenly came together with incredible coherence. I stopped seeing that season of my life as a tragedy. I began to see it as something that was actually loving me enough to take away what was false, what was not essential to my very being. I know my ideas and language may sound contrary and strong, but I don't know how else to say it honestly. What I thought was destroying me was also revealing the most authentic nature within me. What I thought was taking life from me was showing me where life really was. And that changed something in me. It broke a part of my old ego, my old way of knowing who I thought I was. My entire life now seems to tell me that the easiest way to move with joy and love in life is to never really oppose contrast, to never give all my attention to evil or focus too deeply on it. Whenever I have spent too much time defining my enemies or evil in this world, that kind of attention always seems to start to change me. I think that's a distraction for me. I think whatever you keep giving your attention to becomes present in your experience and changes something fundamental inside. And if all of your energy goes into defining evil, fighting evil, naming evil, and then evil is still the thing organizing your inner world and outer world. And I'm not interested in that. I'm only interested in aligning with what I love, because I think that's the truest way through all of this mess we call life. Certainly not by building an identity around what I oppose, and not by focusing my precious attention on any enemy or giving all my attention to what I reject, but instead by aligning so deeply with love that what once looked ultimate now starts losing its power to define any part of my experience. That does not mean pain disappears. It does not mean grief disappears. And it doesn't mean you stop feeling the difficulty of being human. It means you begin to see it differently. You begin to experience it differently. You begin to recognize that even the things you once called tragedy may be doorways into something deeper. And that is one of the reasons Jesus matters to me so much. Because when I read Jesus, I do not see someone building a new religion. I see him calling people back into alignment with what is the deepest and most authentic reality there is. He says it best when he says when phrases like, love God with all your heart and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, or your faith has made you well, and greater things than these you will do, referring to his deeds and those that his followers will do after him. The kingdom Jesus spoke about is nearer than you think. Again and again, I see Jesus trying to wake people up to what is already closer than they realized. Jesus wasn't calling people to a doctrine or to obedience, but to a way of being, a wholly different reality that is available to us right now if we can align with God or this kind of theology of love. So this is where I land right now with all of this. Love is not one attribute among others. It is not just one virtue on a religious list. It is not merely romance, affection, kindness, or sacrifice. Or even though it may include all of these things, instead, love is the deepest reality there is. It is the ground of all being. It is the ultimate reality beneath all existence. And for me, it's the deepest truth of who we are. It's also the truest way I've come to understand God. And if all of this is true, then the work of this life is not to become something other than we are. It's to align with love. It is to awaken from the illusion of separation from love. It is to remember who we most profoundly are, which for me is love. And in doing so, we get to come back into contact with the energy of love. That is God. That is creation. And that is us. This is the place that I intended to live from for the rest of my life. As always, I love you deeply, and I would love to hear where you land on all of this yourself. Please tell me in the comments what you think about love and God. How do you approach these questions? I want to hear from you too and learn from you. Thank you for listening to me and hearing me out, and I'll see you in the next study soon.